is Olga, and in this video let's talk about Vedic astrology and depression. How can we see depression in the birth chart? As part of this video I will explain what combinations create depression, what combinations can be a predisposition for depression, and also we will look at 3 example charts of people who admitted having a depression who are known to have depression. This is going to be charts of Elvis Presley, Ernest Hemingway, and Cudi. Towards the end of the video, I will share some of the Vedic techniques that can be used in order to alleviate some of the depression symptoms. Maybe not to remove them altogether, because that would be hard to do, but at least to alleviate some of the heaviness that's related to depression. And if you like the Vedic astrology and everything about it, you can subscribe to my channel, as this is primarily what I'm talking about here. Okay, so let's dive in. First of all, how do we see depression in the birth chart? What are the combinations? Saturn influence on the 4th house, on planet Moon, or on the sign of Cancer is #1 indicator of predisposition to melancholic moods, depression, sadness, isolation, loneliness, fatigue, and just sad thinking. And another indicator, I should say, of that is Saturn's influence on the Sun. Because Sun represents our sense of self, our vitality, our energy level, our just excitement about life and optimism. When grim and dark, heavy, shiny influences our Sun, instantly creates more of a depression, a negative comparison, or self-consciousness, maybe shyness, and maybe just having a harder time expressing ourselves. Saturn makes it difficult just enjoying being yourself when it influences the Sun. So let's go back to Sun and Moon. Why is that Saturn's influence on the Moon is so depressive for it? Well, Moon represents our thinking mind, our emotions, our feeling part of our personality. And Saturn is a very heavy planet. It's translated from Sanskrit, the slower one, and its influence is quite heavy. It creates tendencies to be melancholic, to slow down. It gives natural sadness and isolation, which is predisposition for depression. And when it influences the 4th house, well, 4th house is related, just similarly to the sign of Cancer, is related to our sense of contentment in life. It represents our foundation, our mother, our relationship with the mother. And sometimes Saturn influence on the significations that represent the mother can create a mother who is detached, who is cold, who is maybe not very emotionally available, because that's the influence of Saturn. It can also create a mother who is depressed herself, and thus it creates a certain depressive patterns in you. Similarly, Saturn's influence on the Sun can create a father who is detached and maybe is not able to lead very exuberant, happy life. Naturally, having parents who are depressed will have a certain influence on the child when they are growing up, and those influences will be imprinted in their consciousness as well and will be shown in the chart as well. So let's look at some of the examples chart and see how it can be seen in the chart of famous people. Before we dive into the chart, I also want to talk about temporary transit of Saturn. So if we see the natal chart as a static or what's given in our lives, transits sometimes can create certain influences on us as well. So when transiting Saturn, for example, enters your 4th house, or it goes over the sign where your Moon is positioned, it creates challenges for that specific period, mental challenges, more predisposition for depression. So for example, if you have already Saturn afflictions in the birth chart, transits might trigger it to a more severe extent. Understanding transits, that is where it's very helpful to go to astrology and understand when they come, when they start and end, in order to understand and rise above the circumstances in your life, in order to see that this actually has an end. Because while you are in it, and Saturn transit can be quite long, it's the slowest moving planet. It moves through one sign in 2.5 years. So So while you are in the midst of it, it can be very challenging and difficult to see when is it going to end, and if your life was even different before it. Because if you're going through mental challenges, it might be hard to remember what it was like before. So understanding Saturn transit and perhaps understanding it, how it influences your key positions in the chart, your sun, your fourth house, your moon, can help you kind of gauge the timeline for this transit and understand that perhaps I'm feeling down, but it's coming to an end in such and such time. Or perhaps I'm going through a challenging period, but this is the time frame I will be in it. So understanding that is very important. And sometimes our mental health improves and we go through a period or a bit period for several years. And this is also can be seen in the chart. So while we look at these charts, that exemplar charts, which more show like a given situation of what is in the birth chart by default, it's also important to consider the transits and how they influence us in more, how they challenge us sometimes. So let's begin with the exemplar charts. The first thing we're going to look at the chart of Ernest Hemingway. He is an American writer and novelist. He received Nobel Prize for Literature. Most of his life he spent fascinated with the topic of war and warfare. He wrote about war quite a bit. And you can see in his first house, we see the Mars and Mercury influence. Now, Mars also rules his fourth house. So instantly it creates this fascination in his mind with war, weaponry, guns. Now we see that his ruling planet Sun is actually positioned in the 12th house. Now this is one of the weakest positions for the Sun because health, his vitality and his physical body is challenged by this position. This Saturn in Scorpio is influencing his fourth house, which is peace of mind, his first house by giving the 10th aspect, and also influencing the ruler of the fourth, Mars, there. And it's even stronger because Saturn is retrograde. Now, retrograde Saturn in the fourth house is a very, very strong indication for possibility of depression. Retrograde planet is stronger, its influence is heavier, and it can be very challenging to resolve the influence. However, self-reflection is a way to go with retrograde planets. Now, this is past life karma that is very, very heavy from the past, and his mental health. His family was affected by mental health too. I think his sister and some other close family member suffered from depression as well. So this predisposition to depression also can be seen in his Navamsha chart. If you look at his Navamsha, it's Saturn here in the 7th house influences his sun. It's his first house. It's influencing his fourth house again. So all of these combinations are quite strong. In the 2.5 years prior to his suicide, Saturn was transiting a sign of Sagittarius where his moon is positioned. His moon is already challenged by Rahu. This combination can create anxiety. And having Saturn going right over his moon weakened his mental health, and he had a number of treatments and electroshock treatments that were not very successful in helping him treating the depression. However, they really upset his mind. At the time of his death, Saturn was opposing his sun, and Mars and Rahu were transiting his first house. He took his life by a shotgun. So this Mars and Rahu influence on the first house also, I think, was instrumental in the choice of that. Next slide, let's look at the Kid Cudi. Kid Cudi is a modern day artist. He's a rapper, singer, songwriter, record producer, movie star, fashion designer. You know, in his chart, Saturn is sitting right there in the first house. It's very strong and it is quite close to his degree of ascendant. It's only 2 degrees from his ascendant, which means the Saturn influence is very, very deeply felt in his persona. So he talks and sings, and his art is a lot about alienation, isolation, depression. You know, like he talks about loneliness quite a bit in his songs. So in his chart, we see this very strong Saturn influence on his personality and his physical body and who he is. It's so close to his degree of ascendant that it is quite clear that this person will have a very strong influence of Saturn. Now, this Saturn also gives a third aspect on his moon, which is also creates a challenging position for the mind. Now, his fourth house is ruled by Saturn, and his sun, even though it's not aspected by Saturn, however, it is influenced by it by being in a sign ruled by Saturn, which is Capricorn. If you look at his chart from the moon, we can see that his fourth house is influenced. Fourth house ruler, which is Jupiter, is aspected by Saturn as well. Now, in a 2013 interview, Kid Cudi revealed that he had suffered an addiction to antidepressants, and he revealed that he spoke of his struggles with depression and suicidal ideation. There's a quote from Wikipedia: "Dealt with suicide for the past 5 years. There wasn't a week or a day that didn't go by where I was just like, I want to check out. I know what it feels like. I know it comes from loneliness. I know it comes from not having self-worth and not loving yourself." In a July 2016 interview, Kid Cudi revealed he suffered from survivor guilt. This is very interesting. This is the quote: "I didn't like that I had money and success and I made it. Everybody I had ever met in my life, good people, weren't able to experience the same, and I wasn't able to truly enjoy my success. Even though I worked hard for it, it bothered me that I had just had so much and my friends didn't." It's fascinating. This survival guilt is a mental condition that occurs when the person believes they have done something wrong by surviving some kind of event. So this quote is so telling of Saturn influence and how it can manifest in your life. You can't enjoy the success because you feel guilty for being successful. Fascinating. And finally, let's look at the chart of Elvis Presley. Everybody knows the king, and we instantly see, of course, this is a strong Saturn in his fourth house and a fairly close conjunction to his moon, only 4 degrees, only 7 degrees apart or so. Nevertheless, it's Saturn and moon in his fourth house being afflicted. And if you look at his chart from the moon again, we can see that his ruler of the fourth house is with Rahu, which is again anxiety. In the 12th house, challenging house, in Papakart between Saturn, and in this sign in sign of Capricorn, ruled by Saturn again. So here is another influence of Saturn on his fourth house from moon. In the Navamsha, we see Rahu in the fourth house. We see Saturn influencing his moon through third house aspect, and also Saturn aspecting, influencing his Lagna. So we know about Elvis that his mother actually struggled with depression all of her life, and his fame also triggered some of depression in her. She had a hard time dealing with his fame, and a constant media attention was very, very challenging for her. And Elvis had a very close, very emotionally dependent relationship with his mother. He was his main confidant, the only caretaker, because I believe his father was absent quite a bit from his childhood. And so his mother was the one that was his closest friend, and she raised him pretty much by herself. He suffered greatly when she died, and he felt guilty also for not being able to take care of her or being able to help her with her depression. Her condition affected him very strongly. He was suffering from depression himself, and part of it was triggered by his mother's depression. And he died. When she died, he was devastated, of course. And over the years, he used a number of drugs to help his mental health, including opiates, all kinds of medications. We see his moon as Shatabisha, which is susceptible to addictions of all sorts, but all having a moon influenced by Rahu like this doesn't help mental health either, makes it worse. So heavy reliance on his medications eventually took his life at the age of 42. And if you look at his periods and transits, actually mostly periods, he was going through Mahadasha of Saturn and Dasha of Moon at the time of his death. So as far as remedial measures go for treating depression, or some of the corrective measures that deal with depression, before going into that, I would highly recommend to look at your chart and have a consultation with astrology, because it will be very unique to your specific chart. For example, If Saturn is afflicting your moon, I would probably suggest actually strengthening the moon rather than doing any remedial measures for the Saturn. If Saturn afflicts your sun, given that sun is an auspicious planet for you and it's not a malefic, I would work on strengthening the sun. And if you're interested in doing remedial measures for the sun, I do have a remedial measures course for the sun, and I will link it in the description. But however, if you're going through Sati, or if you're going through a Saturn period in your dashas, in your planetary period, if you're going through Saturn transit, let's say in your 4th house, perhaps doing something for Saturn will be helpful. And in this case, I usually recommend mantra, Mahamrityunjaya Mantra. Chanting, listening to it, sleeping with the sound of it all works really well. It's the healing mantra, and sometimes it's called death conquering mantra, that you can use in order to alleviate some of the Saturn's influence. I wrote a blog post on how this mantra works, the translation, and I even share the audio recording that I really like of this mantra that you can use as well. I will also leave the link to the blog post below in the description. With this, I would like to end this video, and if you found it helpful, let me know if you found these positions in your chart, and I would be curious to know how was your experience with Saturn influence on your key points such as moon, sun, or the 4th house, and also how was your relationship with your parents and whether they had depression or whether they were influenced by some of these Saturn afflictions in their chart. Until the next time, thank you for watching.